On August 18, 1971, a dad and his son were traveling on a road trip. They took a break for the night close to mile marker 35 on the Redwood Highway in Josephine County, Oregon, near Cave Junction. The next day, while walking in the forest, they found some bones. After examining them, it was clear they belonged to a young woman. Along with the bones, they found 2 rings, one of which had mother of pearl on it and had the letters AL scratched onto it. There weren't any other hints about who the young woman might have been. When the young woman was not identified through the initial, extensive investigation after her discovery, her case became inactive, filed away as Jane Doe, Josephine County, 17 to 940. As technologies advanced over the ensuing years, the Josephine County Sheriff's Office did their best to utilize them in hopes of identifying their Jane Doe. A clay bust of what Jane Doe may have looked like in life was created in 2004. It was at this time that Jane Doe received the nickname Jane Annie Doe from Clackamas County Sheriff's Deputy, Joyce Nagy, the forensic artist who created the bust. Other forensic images of Annie's presumed appearance were eventually developed as well, but the circulation of all these images brought forward many leads. But no answers. In 2016, isotope analysis of Annie's teeth, bones, and hair was used to estimate where Annie may have been born and lived, but likewise did not result in an identification. No matches to Annie's DNA were ever found in law enforcement databases. In November 2018, Annie's DNA was sent to the DNA Doe Project to be run through GeneMatch, an online, open-source genetic genealogy database. Volunteers found several individuals who shared DNA with Annie in the database, but they were mostly distant cousins who lived outside of the United States. Through a 5th cousin of Annie's living in New Zealand, volunteers created an elaborate family tree to try to identify individuals who could be Annie. It took several weeks of combing through records from England, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada to come up with a potential identity for Annie. In February 2019, the DNA Doe Project informed Detective Ken Seelig that they had found a potential match for Annie and that this match had a sister living in Washington state. The sister was contacted and provided a DNA sample. When the sample was tested and compared to Annie, it confirmed that Annie was the woman's sister. On March 14, 2019, the Josephine County Sheriff's Office announced that their Jane Annie Doe was Anne Marie Lehman of Aberdeen, Washington. Coincidentally, she had also been nicknamed Annie by her family. She had been 16 when she went missing and would have turned 65 this year had she lived. While the mystery of Jane Annie Doe's identity has been solved, it is still unclear how she met her fate and how she ended up in Oregon. She may have simply run away from home, but it is believed that she may have been trafficked. These allegations, as well as the cause of her death, remain under investigation. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Pamela Cajanas was the second youngest in a big family with 2 brothers and 5 sisters. She lived on a dairy farm near Stillwater, Minnesota. Though she enjoyed being with her family, she wanted to explore more of the world. When she grew up, she moved to St. Paul to work for a publishing company, but it wasn't adventurous enough for her. She decided at age 25 to enlist in the Navy. In May of 1984, she was sent to the Orlando Naval Training Center in Florida for basic training. She graduated on August 3, 1984. Just 2 days later, a passing driver spotted Pamela's body in the side lot of a vacant home in an unincorporated area of Sanford, Florida. Her white naval uniform was found nearby. Pamela had been beaten strangled. Police were able to put together an extensive timeline of Pamela's activity on August 4th based on receipts and statements from witnesses. Pamela had gone shopping at Orlando's Fashion Street Mall and a nearby Kmart where witnesses saw her with a man. She was also seen with a man at a bar on the Navy base around 7 o'clock that night. It is unclear if it was the same man she was seen with at Kmart. The man or men did not come forward and were not identified by police. DNA was found on Pamela's body, but a match was never found in police databases. After Pamela's case had long gone cold, the Seminole County Sheriff's Office decided to hire a pair of Bonanno labs to use genetic genealogy to construct a family tree of the killer to hopefully identify him. They identified a potential suspect, and authorities surveilled him, and collected a covert DNA sample from his trash, on items including a cigarette butt and used dental floss. It was a match to the DNA at the crime scene. On March 13, 2019, 59-year-old Thomas Lewis Garner was arrested for Pamela's murder. Garner had been a classmate of Pamela's at the Naval Training Center, and the two knew each other, according to the sheriff's office. He had one minor battery charge while serving in the Navy, but no other criminal record. At the time of his arrest, he was working as a dental hygienist in Jacksonville, Florida. Garner has denied involvement in the crime. He was originally granted a bond of $250,000, but it was rescinded just a day later. His lawyer is currently trying to get it reinstated so that his client does not have to remain in jail until his trial. Pamela's father passed away in 2001, and her mother died in 2016, never seeing an arrest in their daughter's case. One of Pamela's sisters has said in a statement that while she and her siblings are in shock over the fact that an arrest was finally made after almost 35 years, they had never given up hope that the day would come. The family announced the news of an arrest being made in Pamela's case on a billboard outside their farm. On July 31, 1999, J.B. Beasley turned 17. She and her friend Tracy Howlett decided to drive to a field party near their hometown of Dothan, Alabama, to celebrate. They left around 10 p.m. in J.B.'s black 1993 Mazda, but they got lost on the way to the party and ended up in the town of Ozark, about 20 miles northwest of Dothan. Around 11:30 p.m., they were in the parking lot of a convenience store that had closed for the night just a half hour before. They got directions back to the road that would take them home from a woman they ran into in the parking lot. Tracy called her mother, Carol Roberts, to tell her that the two had gotten lost and were coming home instead of trying to make it to the party. Tracy told her mother that she loved her before hanging up. The woman who gave the girls directions saw them drive out of the parking lot, heading in the correct direction. When the girls did not arrive home by dawn the next morning, Carol Roberts called the police. JB's Mazda was found around 9 a.m. that morning in Ozark, less than a mile from the convenience store JB and Tracy were last seen at. There were no signs of anything out of place in the vehicle until police opened the trunk and discovered the bodies of the two girls. They had both been shot. In the fall of 2018, the Ozark Police Department hired Parabot Nanolabs to use genetic genealogy to try to match DNA found at the scene of the crime to a suspect. Parabot uploaded the DNA sequence to GEDmatch, but the only matches in the database were very distant, and Parabot was only able to narrow down the search to a particular extended family. The Ozark Police Department began collecting voluntary samples from individuals in that family in hopes of figuring out where their suspect belonged in it. One of the voluntarily provided samples turned out to be an exact match to the sample found at the crime scene. On March 16, 2019, police arrested the individual who provided that sample, 45-year-old Coley McCraney. McCraney is a truck driver and a preacher who had not previously been a suspect in the case. He denies any involvement with the murders. He is being charged with capital murder and rape, and the district attorney has announced plans to seek the death penalty. A preliminary hearing in the case is scheduled for April 3rd. On June 9, 1969, childhood sweethearts Clifford Bernhard and Linda Reich were married at the Pilgrim Congregational Church in Billings, Montana. Clifford was a Vietnam veteran who had received a Purple Heart during his service. The Bernhards spent the next several years working hard to build their lives together. Linda wanted to become a teacher one day and worked at a distribution warehouse while her husband worked pouring concrete. The couple worked together at a second job, cleaning carpets at night. Because of their hardworking nature, their families knew that something was wrong when Clifford and Linda did not show up for their night job on November 6, 1973. The following morning, Linda's mother went to their house to check on them. When she did not get an answer at the door, she forced her way inside the house. There, she found the bodies of her son-in-law and daughter, They had both been 24. Clifford had suffered a major head wound, and they had both been strangled after being tied up for some time. Linda had been sexually assaulted, and all of her underwear had been removed from the home. There was no sign of forced entry into the house, and it appeared as though the Bernhards had a guest at dinner the night before, leading police to believe that the couple may have known their killer. This did not help them make an arrest in the case, however, and the case went cold. Police did not give up on finding Clifford and Linda's killer, though. In 2004, they re-examined evidence from the crime scene and obtained a DNA sample. In 2015, they contacted Parabon Nanolabs to use their snapshot DNA analysis to create a composite image of what the killer may have looked like based on his genes. At the end of 2018, Parabon uploaded the DNA to GeneMatch and performed genealogical research to find the killer's family. On January 3, 2019, Parabon informed police that they had a lead in identifying a suspect. They had narrowed down the search to 2 individuals. These 2 individuals were very closely related, however, so further examination of their DNA would be needed to confirm which one of them was a suspect. One of the individuals agreed to provide a DNA sample. After careful examination of this individual's genetic code, it was confirmed by the Montana State Crime Lab that the sample came not from the individual who volunteered his DNA, but from the other potential suspect. On March 25, 2019, the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office announced that the other potential suspect was Cecil Stan Caldwell, who had been a co-worker of Linda's at the warehouse. Caldwell died in 2003 at the age of 59 and therefore cannot be brought to trial for the murders. While Caldwell cannot legally be declared the couple's killer, identifying him through the DNA at the crime scene has given Clifford and Linda's families some answers to the questions that have haunted them for the past 46 years. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. 26-year-old Wanda Jean Mays lived in Huntsville, Alabama, and worked as a secretary at the United States Army's Redstone Arsenal. She was an active member of her church and was very close with her family. Those who knew her described her as quiet but very kind. Wanda did suffer from what her family describes as a chemical imbalance that required the care of a doctor. She suffered from very sporadic but very intense panic attacks. For the most part, people outside of her family, including her roommate, did not even realize that she was struggling with this issue. However, in May of 1986, her mental health began deteriorating. Her father attributed the decline to Wanda's decision to begin dieting. On May 11, 1986, Wanda had dinner with her parents. On her way back to Huntsville, she stopped at the lakeside home of her aunt and uncle, Betty and Ty Dorman, in the Warrington community just outside of Guntersville. They convinced her to spend the night with them, promising to make sure to wake her early enough for her to get to work on time. At 5 a.m. on May 12th, Betty went to Wanda's room to wake her. The door was locked and there was no answer from Wanda when Betty called out to her. Betty and Ty could not get the door open. They had to have their grandson break it down in order to get into the room. The double-paned window in the bedroom had been broken from the inside, despite no one in the house hearing it shatter during the night. The bed had not been slept in, and Wanda's clothes were neatly folded on the nightstand. On the dock on the lake behind the house, the family discovered Wanda's torn and bloodied nightgown. Fearing that Wanda may have drowned, search drivers were deployed in the lake, which was also dragged. The effort did not find Wanda, but did come across a canoe floating in the lake with more blood inside of it. The blood type was consistent with Wanda's. Witnesses came forward with 2 potential sightings of Wanda shortly after she went missing. A witness claimed to have seen a woman matching Wanda's description walking along Alabama State Route 62 wearing oversized clothing and with wet hair. Another witness claimed to see a woman who looked like Wanda in the back seat of a car in the parking lot of a convenience store in Huntsville. The woman was with 2 men and appeared to be afraid of them. When the witness came out of the store a short time later, the woman was talking on a payphone with one of the men standing with her. Despite the extensive search and leads from witnesses, Wanda's disappearance would remain unsolved for almost 22 years. On January 23, 2008, Marshall County Sheriff Scott Walls announced that Wanda's remains had been located and identified. In 2003, a hunter had come across skeletal remains in a remote part of Georgia Mountain off of Chalakee Road in Gunnersville, 1.8 miles from Betty and Ty Dorman's home. The remains were examined by both the FBI and the University of Tennessee's Department of Forensic Anthropology to conclusively identify them as Wanda and determine her cause of death. Wanda died after falling 150 feet from the cliff. Her remains were discovered below. The sheriff's office ruled her death an accident and announced that there were no indications of foul play. As best as they can determine, Wanda had a panic attack while at her aunt and uncle's home. It was intense enough that she broke through the window and went running out into the night, taking the canoe across a small portion of the lake before continuing to run. In the dark, she wasn't able to see the cliff and ran off of it on accident. Wanda's family accepts the sheriff's office account of what happened to Wanda. After more than 2 decades, they finally were able to give her a proper memorial service and burial. In February 2002, Lee and Brenda Heist of Lidditz, Pennsylvania were in the middle of a divorce. While Brenda had a job as a bookkeeper at a car dealership, she had not yet found a new place to live. She dropped off her 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter at school on February 8th, but was not home when they finished school. The children called their father at work, but he was not immediately concerned, assuming that Brenda was simply running late getting home. He had plans to go to a birthday party for his mother directly from work, but went home when his children called after dark, saying their mother was still not home. Seeing nothing unusual at the house, Lee decided to wait until 8 o'clock to see if Brenda would come home. When she failed to, he called the police. Brenda's car was found in a nearby town 4 days later. It was parked near a bus station, but there were no records of Brenda buying a ticket there or at any other bus station or airport. An investigation was conducted by local, state, and federal authorities, but none of them uncovered solid leads to follow. Dozens of potential witnesses were interviewed. Lee Heist was considered a suspect in Brenda's disappearance due to their marriage falling apart, but he was eventually cleared. In 2010, he petitioned the Lancaster County courts to have Brenda declared legally dead, so that his children could have some closure. On April 27, 2013, a woman walked into a police station in Key Largo, Florida. She said that she believed a warrant was out for her arrest for a probation violation in another county. While she was known to Florida law enforcement as Kelsey Smith, she told police that her real name was Brenda Heist. According to Brenda, on the morning of February 8, 2002, she had gone to a park after dropping off her children at school. While she had a job, her income was not enough to afford an apartment on her own. She had applied for financial assistance so that she and her children would have a place to live outside of the home her husband was getting in the divorce. She had just learned that her application had been denied. She sat in the park crying and was approached by 2 men and a woman who asked her what was wrong. They told her that they were about to hitchhike down to Florida, to abandon her life and go with them. Brenda originally claimed to have been homeless for most of her 11 years in Florida, but that proved untrue. She had lived in a camper with a boyfriend for several years, working manual labor jobs that paid cash and did not require workers to provide identification. She eventually began cleaning houses and lived for almost a year in the home of one of her clients. While she was living there, she stole her employer's driver's license. She used that license at a traffic stop in February 2013, which led to an identity theft charge. This was a violation of her probation, which she was on for previous marijuana charges and traffic violations. It was this violation that led her to report to the police in April. She said that she finally decided to come clean about her identity because of her deteriorating health. Brenda's children were initially shocked to learn that their mother was alive, but that shock quickly turned to anger. After more than a decade of believing their mother was dead, they were understandably upset to learn that she had simply abandoned them. They did not wish to see her. At the time Brenda resurfaced, her daughter Morgan was attending college and working 3 jobs, and her son Lee had recently graduated college and was applying to the police academy. Brenda's ex-husband Lee had remarried and moved away from the home he had once shared with Brenda. Brenda was sentenced to 1 year in prison for her probation violation, but only served 6 months of that sentence due to good behavior and her participation in a work program. Brenda was released from the Santa Rosa County Jail on November 19, 2013, the day after her 54th birthday. She moved to Texas to stay with her mother and look into options for mental health treatment. Crystal Leanne Anzaldi was born on October 10, 1989 in Hillsboro, Oregon, the second child of Dorothy and Jeff Anzaldi. When Jeff joined the Navy, the family relocated to San Diego, California. Without a lot of money, they eventually moved into the first floor of a house in the Golden Hill neighborhood. A friend of Dorothy's had told her that the house's owner was going into a rehabilitation center and needed someone to stay in the house to take care of it and watch after their 3 children. The family, lured by the promise of free rent, took the owner up on the offer, only later learning that he was going to prison and not rehab, and that the home had a reputation as a drug house. 6 weeks after the family moved into the house, on December 8, 1990, Jeff woke up in the bed the entire family shared at 7 a.m. and covered 14-month-old Crystal with a blanket. He then went back to sleep. When he woke up again an hour later, Crystal was no longer with him. The front door of the house, as well as a door to an upstairs apartment, were wide open. Crystal was nowhere to be found, and the police were called. The entire neighborhood was searched, and helicopters flew overhead announcing that a child was missing, but no sign of Crystal was found. In March of 1997, Marshal Champlin Rosado of Puerto Rico called authorities to report that his wife had been abusing and neglecting his stepdaughter Sonia. During the investigation into the allegations, authorities asked his wife, Nilsa Girabolini Guzman, for her daughter's birth certificate. The document she provided was fraudulent. Sonia was placed in foster care, and in October, a blood test confirmed that she was not Girabolini Guzman's daughter. Comparing her smile and a facial birthmark to photos of missing children, they realized that their Sonia was really Crystal Anzaldi. It is unknown exactly how Guillermo Lini Guzman came to have Crystal. That is, if she herself abducted her or if there is another party involved. She did not know the Anzaldis, but did know people who were known to visit their house. She claims a friend had given her Crystal, telling her that the child's mother had died. She also said that she hadn't watched the news around the time she got the baby or learned that an area child was missing. She was married at the time to another man in the Navy, who had been deployed abroad for some time. When he returned home in December 1990, his wife had a baby she claimed was her own, but she would not explain who the child's father was. Inferring that it was not him, he told her to go back to her native Puerto Rico, and he filed for divorce. Guillermo Bolini Guzman and Crystal flew to Puerto Rico on December 21, 1990. Guillermo Bolini Guzman was only ever convicted of fraud for the fake birth certificate she provided to police. During the almost 8 years their daughter had been missing, Dorothy and Jeff Anzaldi had divorced. Dorothy was living in California, and Jeff was back in Oregon with their older daughter Kendra, as well as a second wife and their daughter. The divorce meant that Crystal could not simply be returned home. The matter of her custody had to be settled first and involved courts and agencies in both California and Puerto Rico. Jeff was ultimately awarded custody, and Crystal was brought to Oregon to live with him in February 1998. Crystal had a difficult time adjusting to life back in the United States, hoarding and hiding food because she was used to going without it, struggling in school because she was used to speaking Spanish, and having difficulty responding to the name Crystal rather than Sonia. As an adult, she made the conscious decision to try to forget her time in Puerto Rico. As of 2013, she was working as a caregiver in a retirement home. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Lloyd Lionel Gaines was born in 1911 in Water Valley, Mississippi. His father, Henry Richard Gaines, had previously been a teacher, but was working as a tenant farmer by the time Lloyd was born. Lloyd had 10 siblings, but not all of them survived their childhood. Lloyd's father died when Lloyd was just 15. Following this loss, Lloyd moved with the rest of his family. to be with one of his older brothers in the central West End neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri. Lloyd was several grade levels behind in school when he arrived in St. Louis due to the poor quality of the education that had been available to him in Mississippi. However, he was very smart and quickly caught up. He excelled in school and eventually became the valedictorian of his high school graduating class. He completed high school in just 3 years, rather than the usual 4. Lloyd spent a year at Stowe Teachers College in St. Louis before going on to attend Lincoln University, a historically black university in Jefferson City, Missouri. He financed this chapter of his education by winning a scholarship through an essay competition and by working selling magazines. Lloyd did very well at Lincoln as well, becoming a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and serving as class president in his senior year. In the 1930s, the University of Missouri was the only public institution of higher learning with a law school in the entire state. The university as a whole was only open to white students, so there were no educational options for African Americans in Missouri who wished to become lawyers. The state of Missouri would pay for African American students to leave the state to go to law school, rather than integrate its own university. Noted historian Lorenzo Green was one of Lloyd's professors at Lincoln University. He was also very active in the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP is a civil rights organization, and one of its biggest goals at the time was equality and education. Green presented him with an option for his advanced education that could have a major legal and social impact. With Green's promise of legal support from the NAACP, Lloyd applied to the all-white law school at the University of Missouri in the summer of 1935. It has been debated if Lloyd really desired to become a lawyer or if he merely volunteered to apply to law school so that he could serve as a plaintiff in a lawsuit. Following his inevitable rejection from the school based on his race, the NAACP had actively been looking for a way to challenge segregation in schools. They would require an active law case to mount a new challenge to Plessy v. Ferguson, the 1896 Supreme Court decision that held that public facilities, such as schools, could be segregated as long as the facilities for black and white students were equal. This decision would ultimately remain the law of the land until the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, which recognized that separate schools were inherently unequal. Lloyd was an ideal candidate for such a lawsuit because of his stellar academic and extracurricular record. The University of Missouri would not be able to claim that they were rejecting him based on these aspects of his application, and would have to make their decision based on his race. Silas W. Canada, the registrar at the University of Missouri School of Law, initially refused to even consider reviewing Lloyd's application. In January of 1936, the NAACP sued Canada to force him to make a decision about Lloyd's admission to the school. In March of that year, Canada rejected Lloyd's application on the basis of his race, despite the fact that he had the academic credentials that would otherwise merit his acceptance to the law school. On April 15, 1936, Lloyd and the NAACP filed a lawsuit against Silas W. Canada to get Lloyd admitted to the School of Law at the University of Missouri. The lawsuit failed at the state and local levels, potentially due in part to the fact that the majority of the judges who heard the case at these levels had attended the School of Law at the University of Missouri. Gaines v. Canada was heard by the Supreme Court on November 9, 1938, and on December 12, the court ruled 6-2 in Lloyd's favor. It was not a complete victory, however. The court upheld the notion of separate but equal, but ruled that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution for a state to fail to make an educational program available to all citizens. Missouri had to either let African American students into the existing law school or make a new law school just for them. Missouri took the second option. Following Gaines v. Canada, they began the process of hastily throwing together a law school for African American students inside of a former cosmetology school in St. Louis. The NAACP began the process of bringing further legal action. They believed that the only way to ensure equal education for African American students would be to get the courts to rule that the segregated, clearly substandard school was not equal to the school at the all-white university. Using this reasoning, they began new proceedings to get Lloyd admitted to the School of Law at the University of Missouri. While waiting for new legal proceedings to begin, Lloyd attended the University of Michigan with the help from the NAACP. graduating with a master's in economics in 1938. He worked for the state of Michigan until the beginning of 1939, when he returned to St. Louis to prepare for court dates that at the time were set for that August. Made mildly famous through his Supreme Court case, he traveled around to give speeches for the NAACP and at civil rights gatherings. He would receive small donations at these speeches, but was struggling financially. He often was forced to borrow money from his siblings for even minor expenses. Due to his race, his notoriety, and the ongoing Great Depression, Lloyd had trouble finding employment. Despite his level of education, the only job he could find in St. Louis was working at a gas station. He had to quit this job when he realized that the station's owner was engaging in deceptive business practices. Lloyd then had to travel to find work, first to Kansas City and then to Chicago, where he eventually was able to get a position at a department store. Due to his financial struggles, he often relied on friends and supporters to make ends meet. By the middle of March 1939, with no other place to live, he had been taken in by members of a Chicago chapter of his undergraduate fraternity and was staying at the fraternity house. 1939. He left the fraternity house to go out to buy stamps and never returned. He had plans to go to dinner that evening with the Page family, who were family friends from St. Louis, now living in Chicago. They often had Lloyd over for meals, and that night he wanted to take them out to dinner to repay their kindness. He did not show up. He also did not show up for his first day of work at the department store. His personal belongings were left behind at the fraternity house. Lloyd's disappearance was not immediately noticed due to his independent nature and the fact that he was traveling so much. His family was concerned when they stopped receiving his regular letters, but did not have enough faith in the police at the time to report his disappearance. When he did not resurface in St. Louis for the new round of legal proceedings in the fall of 1939, the public search for him finally began. Since it had been several months since he vanished, there were few clues to follow in the case. In his absence, his case was dropped by the court. An immediate concern was that Lloyd had been killed in retaliation for his participation in the court case. However, crimes against civil rights activists at this time often had at least some aspect of publicity to them, so as to instill fear in other African Americans, who were considering taking action to receive equal rights. The fact that Lloyd's body was not left somewhere it could be found and inspire fear could count against this theory. However, if Lloyd in fact was made to disappear, whoever was responsible for the disappearance pulled it off without leaving any clothes behind, a feat that could also send fear and unease throughout the African American community. Another theory in the case holds that Lloyd simply left to start a new life. In letters to his mother, he wrote of how he was struggling with the publicity his case had garnered for him. While he understood the significance of his court case, he was growing tired of the fight. By the time he went missing, it seemed increasingly unlikely that Lloyd would actually attend law school at the University of Missouri, regardless of the outcome of the court case. He told his mother that he believed that going to the school would be dangerous for him, given the publicity of the court battle. His main motivation for continuing as a plaintiff in the legal action seems to purely be to ensure that other African American students would have equal access to education through the legal precedent in the case, and not for his own personal enrichment. In 2007, an investigation into the case by the Riverfront Times, a weekly newspaper in St. Louis, came across secondhand information that supported the idea that Lloyd had simply walked away from his life. Sid Reedy, a librarian who had been an Alpha Phi Alpha brother at Lincoln University, told reporter Chad Garrison that after he took an interest in the case in the 1970s, he had tracked down Lorenzo Green, Lloyd's old professor. Green allegedly told him that while on vacation in Mexico in the late 1940s, he had received a phone call from Lloyd. He was sure that it was actually Lloyd because he recognized his voice. Lloyd told Green that he had started a business in Mexico City and was doing well. The two made plans to meet for dinner, but Lloyd did not show up to the meal. Green's son corroborated the account, saying that his father had told him the same story. Lorenzo Green had passed away in 1988, so he could not provide a first-hand account of what had happened when he was in Mexico. Furthermore, since Green never actually saw Lloyd, it is still possible that the phone calls were just a cruel hoax, even if they did occur. Some of Lloyd's surviving family is willing to believe that he lived out his life in Mexico, mainly because this would provide their relative with a happy life rather than a violent death. However, the majority of the family does not believe that Lloyd would have completely cut off all ties with his family, especially his mother, even if he did want to leave the country. A theory bridging the two extremes of Lloyd either being killed or walking away from his life of his own accord suggests that Lloyd may have merely been threatened with violence. If people unhappy with the progress Lloyd was making for African Americans threatened his family and ordered him to disappear, he may have complied to protect his loved ones. While leaving his family without answers about what became of him seems cruel, he may have felt it was necessary to ensure their safety. While Lloyd's fate remains unknown, his legacy does have tangible effects in the educational system and the African American community. The legal actions he took played a part in the desegregation of the University of Missouri in 1950, and his Supreme Court case was cited in the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision. In 2000, the Black Culture Center at the University of Missouri was renamed the Gaines Oldham Black Culture Center in honor of Lloyd and Dr. Marion O'Fallon Oldham, a civil rights activist who had also been denied admission to the school on account of her race. A member of the Gaines family finally received a law degree in the state of Missouri in 1991, when Lloyd's great-niece, Tracy Berry, graduated from the School of Law at Washington University in St. Louis. Lloyd was awarded an honorary degree by the School of Law at the University of Missouri in 2006, and the Bar Association of the State of Missouri in turn awarded him an honorary law license. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Yvonne Waters, 17, and Raylene Eaton, 16, were cousins who both lived in Perth, Western Australia. The two were very close and spent a lot of their free time together. On Sunday, April 4th, 1974, they went to the tavern at the White Sands Hotel in nearby Scarborough to hear a band play. Neither girl returned home from the hotel. At first, their mothers were not alarmed. Neither of the girls had ever stayed out all night before, but their mothers each first thought that their daughter may have spent the night at her cousin's home. When the two sisters realized that their daughters were not at either of their homes, they knew that something terrible must have happened. The police did not immediately share the family's concerns about Raylene and Yvonne. They assumed that the two girls had run away or were staying with someone they had met at the hotel. However, after several days, they did question witnesses who had been at the White Sands Hotel that afternoon. Numerous people who had been there that day reported that Yvonne and Raylene had been spending time with three men who appeared to be in their early to mid-20s. They also may have been laborers based on their attire. The doorman at the hotel bar told police that Raylene and Yvonne went out into the parking lot with the three men around 6:45 p.m. The group of five was seen standing around a white Holden panel van. The van had plates from Queensland, and the plate number began with the letters PXJ. It is unclear if the girls got inside or left in the van. Police were unable to trace down the van despite having the partial plate number. Just 10 days after the girls' disappearance, Raylene's only sibling, her 18-year-old brother Graham, was involved in a motorcycle accident. 2 weeks later, he passed away in the hospital from his injuries. Raylene's mother, Jean, now 95, continues to appear publicly and give press interviews in hopes of finding answers to the disappearance of her daughter and niece. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Karen Denise Wells, who went by her middle name, was a 23-year-old mother to an 18-month-old son, William. On April 10, 1994, Denise dropped William off at her parents' home in Haskell, Oklahoma. She told them that she was going to be driving to northern New Jersey to see a childhood friend, Melissa Shepard, and that she would be back to pick up William in 4 days. Denise would not make it to New Jersey. On April 12th, she checked into the Pike Motel outside of Carlisle, Pennsylvania around 8 p.m. She asked the clerk for directions to a nearby McDonald's. She then called Melissa, telling her that she would not be able to make it to New Jersey. Melissa agreed to travel to Pennsylvania the next day and meet Denise at her motel room. Denise told Melissa that she was going to get some dinner at McDonald's before going to sleep before she hung up the phone. This will be the last known contact with Denise. The following day, April 13th, Melissa arrived at the motel with two men she had met at the bar where she was working. When she could not get Denise to answer the door of her room, she asked motel staff to let her into the room. Denise's luggage was in the hotel room, proving she had been there, but the bed did not appear to have been slept in. Melissa called police to report Denise missing. Also on the morning of April 13th, Denise's rented car was found abandoned on a remote stretch of Route 274 near New Germantown in Perry County, Pennsylvania, approximately 35 miles from the Pike Motel. The white Plymouth Acclaim was seemingly abandoned in the middle of the road and left with the front doors on both sides of the car opened. A passing motorist attempted to turn on the car's emergency flashers, but they would not come on, as the car's battery was dead. It was also out of gas. The car appeared to have been driven off-road at some point, as it was streaked with mud and strange scratches. The car also had 700 more miles on it than would have been expected had Denise driven from Tulsa, where she had rented it, straight to the area where she was last seen. At a press conference in 2009, Cumberland County District Attorney David Freed told the press that there were indications of criminal activity in Denise's rental car, but would not specify what those indications were. It has previously been reported that a small amount of marijuana had been found inside the car. According to authorities, there were no signs of struggle inside the car when it was found. Denise's coin purse, still with cash inside of it, was found in a ditch near where the car was found. There was a thorough search of the surrounding woods and the few hunting cabins that were nearby, but no other sign of Denise was found in the area. Strange details and unanswered questions about the days prior to Denise's disappearance have plagued the investigation. Upon examination, problems with Denise's trip appear even before she began it. Denise had told her parents that she would only be gone for 4 days, but the drive from Haskell, Oklahoma to Northburg in New Jersey would today take about 22 hours each way. While available highways may have been different in 1994, it is hard to imagine that Denise's travel time could have been much shorter than that. With the drive taking up almost half of the time Denise planned to be away, and assuming that Denise would also stop to sleep like she did at the motel in Pennsylvania, that would leave almost no time at all for her to spend with Melissa. This begs the question, what was so important to make Denise spend so much time getting to the East Coast just to see Melissa for such a short amount of time? Melissa had been working as an exotic dancer in New Jersey, and Denise had decided to drive halfway across the country to see her because Melissa was going through what Denise's family has described as personal issues. Denise's mother has also publicly stated that Denise was going to save Melissa, but it remains unknown exactly why Denise felt it was necessary to make the long trip. Phone records and witness statements also placed Denise in the Pennsylvania towns of Shafferstown and Benville on April 12th. Both of these towns are approximately an hour further east than the Pike Motel. Since New Jersey was her intended destination, it is strange that Denise drove an hour back in the opposite direction of it to stop for the night, especially since she then claimed that she would not be able to make it all the way to New Jersey. Denise appears to have had some other task to complete in the area, besides just seeing Melissa. Denise's family still makes public appeals on her case, hoping that one day a new witness will come forward to help make sense out of this confusing case. As of 2018, Denise's son William was 25 and engaged to be married. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Maya Little was born on April 6, 1910 in Warm Springs, Georgia. She worked as a physical therapist at the Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute for Rehabilitation from 1927 to 1931. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had purchased the struggling Warm Springs Infantile Paralysis Foundation and renamed it after himself in 1927, after visiting it in hopes that it would improve his mobility following his own polio diagnosis. Myoma personally treated Roosevelt several times and was reportedly one of his favorite therapists. Roosevelt eventually ascended to the presidency of the United States, and the United States eventually descended into World War II. Myoma enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps in early 1943 and used her skills as a physiotherapist to serve her country. She had married and divorced, but retained her married name of Ridings. By August of 1943, she had become a corporal and was stationed at Camp Atterbury in Indiana. On August 28th, Corporal Ridings was granted a weekend leave and traveled the 30 miles from Camp Atterbury to Indianapolis on a 330 bus. She stopped at a liquor store at 445 to purchase a bottle of whiskey. Just after 5 p.m., she checked into the Claypool Hotel, where she was given room 729. At 5:30, she called room service to ask for 6 bottles of soda and ice to be brought up to her room. At 6:15, she called for more ice to be brought up. At 8 p.m., a housekeeper arrived at room 729. When no one answered her knock at the door, she let herself in. She then discovered the body of Corporal Ridings, naked from the waist down and covered in blood. It was later determined that Corporal Ridings had been hit over the head with and then slashed with a shattered glass from the whiskey bottle she had purchased earlier in the day. Her autopsy also found that she had consumed approximately 10 ounces of the 100 proof whiskey before her death. Corporal Ridings had sex shortly before her death, but the medical examiner and the police disagreed over whether it had been consensual or not. Given the fact that she had recently gone through a divorce, her ex-husband, Lawrence S. Ridings, would seem like an obvious suspect. But he was a soldier deployed overseas at the time of the murder. There was only 46 cents left in Corporal Ridings' room. She had not prepaid for her hotel room, and she had been seen trying to make change for a $20 bill earlier in the day, indicating that she had been robbed. It has been widely theorized, however, that her killer only took the money to make it look like a robbery, rather than that being the actual motive for the crime. The bellboy who brought her ice at 6:15 that evening, 22-year-old Robert Wolfington, was subjected to hours of continuous questioning and a lie detector test after police found discrepancies in his initial statements. Wolfington was never connected to the crime through evidence, but he did provide important clues in the case. He told police that when he entered room 729 at 6:15, a dark-haired woman dressed all in black, complete with black veil, had been in the room with Corporal Ridings. She had been sitting on the bed smoking a cigarette. Corporal Ridings would routinely travel to Indianapolis and stay in a hotel on weekends when she was granted leave from the Women's Army Corps. She was known at area hotels for being a generous tipper and for throwing large parties. On her last several weekends in Indianapolis, Corporal Ridings had been seen at parties around the city with a woman all in black. It was therefore thought that it was possible that this was the same woman in black seen in her room on the night of her death. However, a woman named Ruth Hoover came forward shortly after the murder, asserting that she was the woman in black seen with Corporal Ridings out in public. Ruth Hoover had served in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps at Camp Atterbury with Corporal Ridings, but had left the service when it became the Women's Army Corps and its members received full Army benefits. In July 1943, she told the Indianapolis News that she and Corporal Ridings had spent all of their leave weekends together prior to her departure. She had left Indiana on August 4th and was in her hometown of Water Valley, Mississippi, at the time of the crime, and as such could not be the same woman seen in room 729 on August 28th. She also told the newspaper that her friend drank her whiskey straight, so if she ordered 6 bottles of soda, she must have been expecting a crowd. Identifying the woman in black was an important goal of the investigation because she may have witnessed the crime or the killer arriving at room 729. While Corporal Ridings could have been killed any time between 6:15 and 8 p.m., there is an indication that she was killed at the beginning of that window. Corporal Ridings had scheduled a date that night with Corporal Emmanuel Fisher, who was also stationed at Camp Atterbury. They had planned for him to pick her up at the hotel at 6, but he had been running late. He arrived at the hotel at 6:30 and called her room from the lobby. There was no answer. He assumed that she made other plans when he did not show up on time and left the hotel. While Corporal Ridings may have simply ignored the phone, it is also possible that she may have been fending off her killer at that time, meaning that the woman in black would have been in the room just 15 minutes before the murder occurred. The murder of Corporal Ridings briefly achieved national attention when her connection to President Roosevelt was discovered. This publicity brought out a few confessions to the crime, but they were all discredited, retracted, or both. There have been attempts to link the case to other cases in Ohio, Chicago, and California, but none of these theories have ever been proven true. Corporal Ridings was buried in her hometown. The Claypool Hotel has since been torn down. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. St. Patrick's Day fell on the Friday of spring break in Pickering, Ontario in 1995. After a long night of partying that began on March 16th, a group of 6 friends said they were going to go goof off at a nearby marina in the early morning hours of the holiday. Around 12:50 that morning, 18-year-old Chad Smith, along with Jay Boyle, Michael Cummins, Robbie Rumbold, Danny Higgins, and Jamie LaFave, all 17, left the party, never to be seen again. The 6 boys would in time become known as the Lost Boys of Pickering. One of the first people to notice that something was wrong was Jay Boyle's girlfriend, Monique. The couple lived together in a basement apartment so that they could raise their infant daughter. As word spread amongst their friends that all 6 boys were missing, their families began looking for them. The police were not overly concerned about the boys failing to come home until the afternoon of Saturday, March 18th, more than 36 hours after they left the party. At that point, they had connected the reports of the boys saying they were going to find a boat before leaving the party, with 2 thefts reported at marinas on Frenchman's Bay, off of Lake Ontario. Was reported stolen on the morning of St. Patrick's Day at the East Shore Marina, and a water tricycle was reported stolen from another nearby marina the same day. Fearing that the boys may have drunkenly gone out on Lake Ontario in the stolen vessels and accidentally capsized, police departments along the lake as well as the military joined forces to search Lake Ontario by boat and from the air. No sign of the missing boys or the missing were ever found. Security footage at the East Shore Marina shows Robbie, Michael, and Jamie entering the East Shore Marina at 1:48 a.m. on March 17th. It is suspected that Jay, Danny, and Chad were at the other marina taking the water tricycle. It is unknown why the boys decided to split off into 2 groups. Someone living near the marina reported hearing a motorized boat going out onto Lake Ontario between 2:30 and 3 a.m. The theory that the boys either drowned or were lost to hypothermia in the frigid waters of Lake Ontario after losing control of their vessels during their joyride seems like the obvious answer to the mystery. However, many find it suspicious that no evidence was found in the search of the lake. Neither vessel, none of the boys, or any of their belongings have ever been found. A gas can that may have belonged to the stolen motorboat eventually washed up on the shores of Wilson, New York, across the lake, but it has not definitively been tied to the stolen boat. While both vessels certainly could have sunk somewhere they could not be found, and none of the bodies of any of the boys could have ever surfaced, it is surprising that absolutely everything from both vessels and all 6 boys could never be found simply by chance. In April of 1998, large grates at the Sir Adam Beck hydroelectric generating station in Queenston, near the Niagara River, were cleaned for the first time in 7 years. Workers discovered 2 sets of remains stuck in them. One of them was surrounded by a pair of red jeans. Jay Boyle was believed to have been wearing a pair of red Levi jeans the night he vanished. She began pushing for police to investigate the possibility that Jay had finally been located. It would take several years, a few controversies, and several advances in technology before DNA finally proved that the remains were not Jay's in December 2018. The families of the 6 boys continued to gather at Lake Ontario on St. Patrick's Day to mark each anniversary of the boys' disappearances. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. In 2007, 27-year-old Chantel McDougall lived just outside of Nanab, a small town in Western Australia, with her 45-year-old partner, Simon Cadwell, their 6-year-old daughter Leela, and family friend Tony Poppich. While Simon rarely left the house, Chantel worked at multiple jobs, although Simon disapproved of her socializing with her coworkers from any of them, despite her outgoing nature. A controlling partner who Chantel would always trail behind, instead of walking beside. One factor in this dynamic in their relationship was the age difference between the two. Chantel had been just 17 when she met the then 35-year-old Cadwell at an ashram in 1997. At the time, Simon was working on his second book, Servers of the Divine Plan. Cadwell believed that the world was coming to the end of a 75,000-year cycle, and that not everyone would be spiritually developed enough to ascend to the next higher spiritual plane once the physical world was gone. He would eventually develop an online group known as the Truth Fellowship. Followers of Cadwell would use an online forum called the Gateway to discuss his ideas. Cadwell was known on the forum simply as C. He believed that maintaining his anonymity was important because there were various groups who would want to target him and his daughter since they were so spiritually developed. In 1998, Chantel moved into the home Cadwell shared with his partner, a woman named Deborah, to help take care of their son Daniel, eventually being joined by a third woman. When Chantel became pregnant with Leela, Deborah ended her relationship with Simon and took their son with her when she left. By the time Leela was born, the third woman had ceased living with them as well. Chantel and Simon moved around Western Australia, picking up Tony Poppich along the way, ending up outside of Nannup in 2004. On July 13, 2007, Chantel, Simon, Tony, and Leela traveled to Busselton to sell Chantel's car to a dealership there. The group was then seen getting into a car waiting nearby. Chantel deposited the $4,000 she received for her car, and her bank account was never touched again. Nor were Simon or Tony's accounts. The following day, the family sold their 2 long-haired dachshunds. The woman who bought them, Carolyn French, would be the last known person to see Chantel. She said Chantel appeared anxious when she came to collect the dogs. The same day, Chantel called her parents and told them that they were going to Brazil to live amongst people with similar spiritual beliefs. She said that Simon had already left, and that she and Lila were about to follow. Leela's passport had arrived at their home the last time Chantel's parents had been visiting a few months before, so they were not surprised that they were going to be traveling abroad. However, when 3 months passed and they had not come back to Australia or made any sort of contact from Brazil, the McDougals reported their daughter and granddaughter missing. The family's home appeared to have been left abruptly. While the group had spent some time making certain arrangements, like selling their cars and rehoming the dogs, they had not taken such care with the home. Perishable food was left out, and they had not gotten rid of any of their furniture. Their clothing was gone, but they had left behind their computer, their wallets, their credit cards, and other important items they would have needed for international travel. A note addressed to their landlords was left on the door of the house and had been discovered on July 19th. It said that due to the lack of sleep caused by the electromagnetic fields, a reference to a transformer installed on a power pole near the home recently be the death of him, the tenants had no choice but to abruptly move overseas to Brazil. The installation of this transformer had caused a major escalation in Simon's already typically erratic behavior. He would rant and rave about how it was being put there by the government as an attack on him and his daughter, and he had buried magnets in his yard to counteract the electromagnetic waves he believed the transformer was using to attack him. According to one of his neighbors, Simon's demeanor went from highly agitated to surprisingly calm just prior to his disappearance. 2 major discoveries were made in the investigation that convinced authorities that there was more to the story than a group of people simply moving away. The first was the fact that there was no record of Chantel, Lila, Simon, or Tony leaving Australia or entering Brazil. No sightings of individuals matching the group's description were ever reported in Rio Branco, the city they planned to travel to and live outside of. This raised concerns that the story about going to Brazil was merely a cover for some other plan inspired by their alternative spiritual beliefs. The second concerning fact was Simon Cadwell's true identity. Police discovered Simon Cadwell was not really Simon Cadwell, but a British national named Gary Feltham. Feltham had stolen the birth certificate of one of his associates in the UK and used it to get a passport and then traveled to the United States, India, and then Australia. In 2013, authorities learned that on July 14, 2007, someone going by the name Jay Roberts and using Tony Poppich's cell phone boarded a train from Bunbury to Perth. Later that day, someone claiming to be Tony Poppich checked into a hostel in Perth and provided Tony's driver's license as identification. The following day, Jay Roberts purchased a ticket for a 7 a.m. train. It is unclear if this person was actually Tony, or if Gary had once again stolen someone's identity to travel. In December 2017, a 3-day-long coroner's inquest was held to examine the evidence in the disappearances. During the course of the inquest, it was revealed that police had failed to follow up on potential sightings of various members of the group, and on other potential evidence that is now lost. In May 2018, the coroner, Barry King, after reviewing the evidence presented at the inquest, released a report saying that he could not conclusively decide if the missing people were alive or dead. Chantel's parents, Jim and Catherine, who had fought for the inquest to be held, were frustrated with the lack of new information in the case, but continue to hope that they will one day have answers about what became of their daughter and granddaughter. Tell us your thoughts in comments below. And that's all the time we have for today's dive into these chilling mysteries. Remember, these cold cases aren't just stories. They're real lives waiting for closure. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the mysteries of the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never forget the faces behind the cases. Goodbye for now and take care.